Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Meet the Poet. I'm Florrie. I'm hosting the hour, so I'll be posing all of your questions to our two poets who are joining us tonight. You can get involved by just typing in the live chat function on YouTube or Facebook Live. So the two poets joining us tonight are sharing some amazing work, and I have no doubt that there'll be some fans already in the audience and some newcomers too. So it'll be a real treat for everyone watching. So without further ado, let's bring both of our poets onto the live stage tonight. Hello, hi both.
Hello, hello, Oz.
We are joined by Oz Hardwick and Lucy Crispin. So thank you for joining us tonight. I'll give a short introduction just so everyone at home can know a little bit about you. So Oz is going to be reading first. Oz is a poet, writer, photographer, music journalist, and somehow alongside all of those, he is also Professor of English and Programme Leader for Postgraduate Creative Writings at Leeds Trinity University. Oz has had his work published extensively and has performed all around the world. And if I'm right, he's had 5 collections and 4 pamphlets published. I think that's
something
correct.
Like that, yeah.
Something like that, right. Quite a lot. So yeah, Oz will be reading first for us tonight, and then Lucy is our second speaker. Lucy is a former South Cumbria Poet Laureate, and she writes both fiction and poetry. She uses poetry in her work as a therapist, and she also used to lecture literature and teach creative writing. And Lucy's also had some fantastic opportunities to expand her talent with words by working as a librettist, which sounds like very interesting work. So welcome to Lucy too.
Thank you very much.
It's lovely to have you both here this evening. And I think I'd just like to begin with what is probably quite a basic question, but always good to get started with, which is, how did you both get into poetry? What was it that made you start writing? Shall we start with Lucy? Would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, I've always read. My dad used to tease me that he could go into the bathroom at home and he'd find a book jammed behind the taps because I wanted to be able to carry on reading when I was cleaning my teeth or washing. So literature's always been just a part of me in my life. And I studied it at uni and then at postgrad and then taught it. But writing for myself, I kind of lapsed into that when I was on a break from my academic career, which I subsequently left. And I think it's something to do with having the headspace to hear what I was thinking as opposed to just what other poets and authors were thinking. So you're nodding also, so you might recognise some of that.
Oh, yes. Yeah. If I should go now, I think before I even read, and I was a very slow reader and didn't really get keen on reading until later than most, but I loved the sound of words and the texture of words, I think. My grandfather, who lived with us in our tiny little house with 3 generations of us in there, he had been an agricultural worker, but had a passion for the lake poets and Robert Burns, and could and would indeed, given half the chance, just recite great lengthy poems by all of them that he just sort of internalized all his life. And so I grew up with my grandfather, who I was very close to, just enjoying his words and poetry. So it seemed sort of natural. And I've always loved music as well. So I think it was more the rhythms and the sounds really before the sort of literary side of it for me. And then I went on and I did get into reading and then did the degrees and so on and so on. But I think it came before I could even really write that sort of interest in the sound of words. And I have been back to some of his writing and incorporated it in mine in a piece that I wrote, the composer called Pete Byron Smith, who may be watching, that we released a couple of years ago. So it sort of comes, my grandfather's voice still comes out in some of the things I write occasionally.
Yeah. So obviously you've both taught, and I mean I find this quite an interesting question, which is, I mean, a lot of people talk about poetry sometimes being inaccessible, you know, difficult to read or difficult to write. Do you either of you find it's difficult to write poetry, or does it come naturally to you?
Well, I love that definition of a writer. I think is it Thomas Mann who said a writer is someone for whom writing is more difficult than it is for other people, which quite often feels like how it is. But because for me it's about processing experience, it sort of comes and goes when the experience is ready to be processed.
For me, I'd say no, it's not. It's probably the only thing I find that isn't difficult. I find conversations difficult. I find organising yourself difficult, but sitting down and writing is the only thing I don't find difficult. So, yeah, so the opposite in many ways.
Yeah.
There is no one size fits all, I think so.
Oh no.
Yeah.
But it's a matter of like any other art skill or what have you. It's you know, you use the muscles like a musician does, and what is it? You have to do so many hundreds of hours, and you do it automatically. And you know, I write every day and have done for years and years and years, and so the process is there, and I sort of slot into it every morning.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, you mentioned that word inaccessible that people often associate. And one of the things I was really passionate about when I was in academia, and one of the things I do now in some of the groups I facilitate, is to try and bring people and poetry together, because I think so many people have had incredibly negative experiences of doing poetry when I have the message that there is a meaning which they have to dig out somehow. So I've always loved working particularly with people who aren't experienced in reading poetry and don't feel skilled, because it's such a magic world, and to see people get it and relate to a poem is really exciting.
Definitely. I think it's fantastic to try to broaden it to as many people as possible, really. I think it's probably
go the other side again. I think some should be really, really hard, and you should enjoy how hard it is as well.
Oh yeah.
That's the other thing.
It's about developing that muscle too, isn't it? And giving yourself the confidence to approach a text which needs lots of picking at and head scratching.
You're never going to understand. It'll just make you go, "What?" every time. If it's in a good way, that's enough.
Or go, "Ooh," or just respond. Yeah.
I think I saw something that said on a scale of 1 to 100, there should be, or on a scale of difficulty from 1 to 100, that there should be a poem that falls on every single number along the way, and that they all have their own purpose, really.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I think, Oz, we should probably hear some of your work and just dive straight in. I would actually, obviously you write a lot of your work in prose poetry form. Would you be able to just like explain that a little bit for anyone watching who might not know what that is?
Okay, right. I thought I'd probably do that after, but I tell me when I'm going on too long. I'm working on a book on it at the moment. Prose poetry is poetry without line breaks, essentially. And you think, well, isn't that just prose? And it's thinking about the rhythms. Essentially, prose poetry is poetry that's one line, and it's a very long line. It only turns when you get to the end of the page. There's no hard returns. So you think of it in the same way, but it's just that you don't have that particular tip and balance that you get with the line ending. So it's not just poetry with the breaks taken out, with the line breaks taken out. It's poetry that just is one line. I think that's the shortest version I can give you. Okay,
that's helpful. Yeah, that is helpful. And the first thing that you're reading is from Wolf Planet, which I've heard be described as a prose poetry experimental micro novella form. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's I'm predominantly a prose poet and have been for a number of years, and This is a sequence of prose poems which relate to each other and perhaps suggest a novella, but like as poetry does, it's more about what it suggests than the actual narrative thread going through it. Okay. And it's all colour coordinated. I hope everyone's noticed that that we've both got similar colour books on our little thing, and it matched the background, it matches, and with clothes match. You know, we've really coordinated this, didn't we?
All totally thought out of.
Absolutely, yeah. Been planning for months. Shall I read a bit?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is the opening from Wolf Planet. Ahead of schedule, we're entering the realms of science fiction, strapping ourselves into reclining chairs, watching screens fill with a planet that looks something like the Earth we remember, but less detailed, less hospitable. Entering into the spirit of things, we adopt expressions of heroic concentration and end each sentence with over. Who'd have thought that dystopia would be so mundane? Who'd have thought that parallel worlds would be stacked so tight that there'd be no room left to breathe? Rivers run black, and when we check the likelihood of a breathable atmosphere, the data's inconclusive, winking digits demanding caution while confirming the lack of alternatives. Scans estimate a population of almost 8 billion humans, but the only voice in our retro headsets, sizzling through static that blisters like boiling fat, is the big bad wolf, suggesting last-minute adjustments and promising a warm, warm welcome. Sometimes the most important decisions come down to generic tropes and narrative expectations, and I momentarily consider a young girl running through a dark wood, a proud pig thatching his dream home, raising a lipped anthropomorphic finger to test the weather. But we're locked into our story like a rebel ship in a tractor beam, braced for a battle against insurmountable odds. We prepare ourselves for impact, exchanging steely smiles as the galaxy howls like a wolf. I wonder at what point I should reach for your hand. So that's the opening part of Wolf Planet.
Thank you. It's so rich. I almost just want to pause just to sit and think about it all because there's a lot going on. I also, there's this line that I got that sometimes the most important decisions come down to generic tropes and narrative expectations. How do you think that plays out in your poetry? Do you often deviate from the norm, or do you try to fulfill those tropes?
I deviate wildly, which is why I sort of mention it near the start, because I think one of the things about a prose poem that I particularly like is that you glance it on the page and you think, here's some prose, and it does things you don't expect. That's one of the delightful things about prose poetry. It tricks you as soon as you start reading it. And so there's definitely that right at the start. And of course, we've got the tropes in here. There's bits of science fiction, bits of fairy tale, and all sorts of things like that. So it's, yeah, I'm very aware of my narrative theory and my morphology of folk tales and my hero with 1,000 faces and all this stuff. And I like to play with them and shuffle the bits around.
Yeah. Suzanne Owen says that was a great opening poem. So you're off to a good start. I
am. Thank you, Suzanne.
Okay, let's go on to the next poem, which I believe is Origami.
It is. This is from Learning to Have Lost, which came out in 2018, as I remember, which isn't a sequence, and it's a collection of quite fragmentary pieces, which were occasioned by, along with one of my full collections of mainly lineated poetry, by the my mother's passing and getting rid of the family home and all the memories that go with that. And it was in, what was it, 3 years ago? It was 50 years since the first Apollo 8 first went round the moon, so it was the first human beings to lose sight of the Earth. And I'm fascinated by space, and I was when I was a kid at that time. It's the first mission I remember. And I started thinking about what else I could remember from 1968, and then folded it up inside a Rupert the Bear annual, which used to have an origami page every year. This is called Origami. As you fold the sheets, it reminds me of the great origami craze of 68, 69. Wherever you went, there were people folding squares into something or other, frogs that hopped when you tapped them with a pencil, lotuses that opened to reveal Shiva, delicately balanced and winking. Some days the air was so thick with planes you had to fold bell-like umbrellas to keep their sharp noses at bay. On rainy days, gutters would become armadas of frigates and galleons, each bristling with guns that pinged matchsticks off passing traffic. Origami was prime-time entertainment. There were special live broadcasts at breakfast time from the World Championships in Mexico City, and soaps would end on a seemingly impossible crease, leaving the nation anxiously awaiting the outcome the following evening. A surgeon won the Nobel Prize for the first successful origami heart, and when those gloved astronaut hands planted the first origami stars and stripes on the moon, the whole world held its breath and watched. You, being those few years younger, don't remember it, but the way you fold the pillowcases, sharp edge to sharp edge, could have stopped paper clocks. So that's my reminiscence of 1968-69.
It's fantastic. Oh, sorry, Lucy, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I forgot about that. I was just saying I really enjoy the way the text is framed by the you that you come back to at the end. It kind of holds this long, as it were, diversion in your head. It's really
that is something I do tend to do. Because these things can head off into strange directions. And I like to have some little hint that reminds you where you started, even if it doesn't necessarily come to a neat conclusion. Wolf Planet's a bit more open, but that's because it's a sequence of about 20, 26, 28, I think. But particularly with Learning to Have Lost, they're very tight little poems.
And it does work really well. The paper image it's very effective. I think it's a great choice. And I will also say that Joe Williams says that he loves that poem and that Dean Starling Origami is a great one.
Dean, we've got someone from Russia. Brilliant. Hi. We're international. And Joe, who's probably still in a beer garden. Yeah. Should I just carry on?
Yeah. Your next poem, is it Highway Code Addendum?
Highway Code Addendum. Yeah, I won't say anything about this. I'll just. We've all been in cars and missed turns. We missed the turn, but your first rule of motorway stated that the next exit would loop us round, bring us back, and that we could make up time later. But now it is later, and we're in the dead time, the flatlands, the country without signs or shadows that we thought we'd left behind, with Arthur Rackham and Edmund Dulac. After Once Upon a Time, anything can happen, and the figures, by the way, have awfully long thumbs pricked with needles. If there were a house, we would ask for shelter, sleep with a sword between us, and breakfast on ashes. We could run away down a breadcrumb trail with wolf breath hot at our necks. Your second rule of motorways states that names are power, that the chaplain at the gate sells curses sprinkled with sugar, and that only stars are to be trusted. Windscreen wipers reveal faces in the trees, a straight road to the gingerbread house, and I consider the last of my 3 wishes.
Fantastic. I have a question, if you don't mind me asking, which is, obviously you say wolf breath, and wolves seem to recur throughout a lot of, Wolf Planet is the title of Wolf Planet, but they seem to recur quite a lot. Is there a particular significance to wolves for you?
The first one that appeared was in that particular poem, and the memory that set it in motion was being with a bunch of us in my deputy headmaster's car. We had nothing so luxurious as cars, going up to near Cheddar. I'm a West Country lad, to go caving. In the days when you could suddenly phone up a member of your class and say, "You're a bit of a nutter, do you want to come caving?" And we'd all go off. And then you just go down a hole in the ground. And I remember him just saying, after we missed a turning, one of the other guys, one of the lads said, "Oh, but if we go off at next, this will happen." He said, "Oh, is that your first rule of motorways?" And it sort of stuck in my head, because I think it's probably the first time I'd ever been on a motorway. And so, but we were going roughly towards Glastonbury at that point, and so it tied into all the Glastonbury stuff, and you go there and it's all folklore and so on. I started thinking about fairy tales, and that's the first time the wolf crept up on me, and he sort of followed me round for a couple of years as that sort of if you read something like the Duchess of Malfi, we've got Ferdinand, I think he's called, who thinks he's turning into a wolf, but the hair's on the inside. And so it's a little bit of the sort of monster inside you, I think, who takes on different forms, because then I started thinking about the wolf and his significance. And sometimes he's frightening and sometimes he's less frightening. But he became a sort of a character to sort of talk about the things in your head that aren't necessarily always friendly to you, or sometimes don't seem friendly, even though they might be, and vice versa. So the wolf, and he still crops up occasionally, but less so. I've been thinking more about. I've had more Dante leading me the past couple of years, because it's the 700th year anniversary of his death this year. So when someone mentioned that to me last year, I've started thinking about that and been writing a lot of things which I hope will come out later this year, based in various ways on the Divine Comedy particularly. But even the wolf has occasionally stuck his little wet nose in the corner. But Wolf Planet was the big one. But he'll probably be there for a bit longer.
Mm-hmm. So just obviously mentioning Webster and Dante, do you have a lot of influence from past writers being brought into your work?
Well, I think everything that you read comes in somehow, doesn't it? And it's the things that particularly speak to you and stay there for a long time. I'm not a Webster sort of Renaissance sort of person at all, but I've read them all at different times because of English degrees and things. But there's little bits stuck in my mind. Dante does come backwards and forwards, but academically I'm a medievalist. So medieval literature does particularly lodge with me, and there's something loosely to do with Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which is my absolute favourite, that I've been working on for a few years, and it's gradually growing. And that's a bit of an epic, but maybe another 2 years yet before that finally limps into haute dessert, brandishing an axe and looking scared. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, everything comes in, everything.
I would love to keep talking on that for a long time, but I think we should probably hear another of your poems. And the next one is Station, if that's correct.
Yeah, and I think given how long I've taken, I did slip in something in between station and to station, but I will go straight from station to station and leave out the middle one. So a lot of juggling with removing notice to quit. Zip through that slide and we'll quit that one. So this is station to station, and it's again from Learning to Have Lost, and station is near the start and to station is at the end, or near the end. Time was I'd fall asleep on trains, Wake up with a hangover to find myself 3, 4, 10 towns beyond my destination. I'd arrive home hours late, unsure where I'd been. After a time, I started waking up in strange houses, sometimes on a sofa, sometimes in a bed, once in a large white room full of silence and flowers. It was a knack I had. Now I rarely wake up at all, sleeping across whole countries as strangers try to ignore me, bustling about their days. A friend thought she once saw me nodding through smeared railway glass in a flat West Country summer, but neither of us could be sure. So when the doors close, that's it, the end of everything, whether there's a new beginning or not. I've never made plans and it's too late to start now, so I begin by listing my assets. Credit card, debit card, £48.67 in cash, along with a few euros from a recent holiday. The clothes I'm sitting down in, all of my own teeth, a remnant of my hair, a few extra pounds I've never managed to shift and have just got used to, and a tall, maybe 2 foot, maybe a bit more, domed cage in which is perched a canary. Now, the train's pretty crowded, so I have to hold the cage on my lap, which means looking at the woman opposite through twinned bars. It's like she's visiting me in prison, and I wonder if she has a file in a cake, or perhaps a confession of an affair that nobody wanted to happen, but it did, and she tried to wait for me, but she couldn't, and it breaks my heart, but I can't blame her, and I can't hold back my sobbing anymore, and she leans forward, and she looks at the canary, and then at me, and I see that she's crying too, and so is everyone in the carriage, and the ticket collectors weeping and handing out tissues with neat holes clipped in each corner, and the canary is singing like I've never heard before.
Oh.
So that's station to station. And I probably ought to just say that they're all true stories, every one of these. And I say that about all my poems. They're all true stories, and they're all love poems. They're the things that I have in common.
How does it work in the book? Are there poems between the two in the book, or do they go through?
There are indeed. Yeah, one's quite near the start on page 6, and there it is. Station. Ellipsis, and then other things happen and you pick up to station later on. There's a lot of doubling in the collection, so it's the poems sort of echo the ones opposite, and it's that Gawain and the Green Knight thing again. I brought it in again, that you sort of go round in a circle but you're somewhere entirely different by the time it's finished, even though you're in the same place you start. So it's yeah,
T.S. Eliot, then.
Sorry?
I said Gawain all the way to T.S. Eliot.
Yes.
Is it the end of the quartet where he talks about coming back to where you started?
Yeah. Yes. But all of these are skinny little chapbooks, and they're like that because they are thought of in terms of the number of poems in them and that sort of thread between them. Even if they're not necessarily narratives, they sort of speak to each other. I'm a music nut. If you were to look around here, you see lots of instruments below thingy level, none of which I can play very well, but all of which I play enthusiastically. And I think of them like a sort of a side of an album, I guess, all these things of the songs and the moods going in and out. So,
well, I was wondering if David Bowie was involved, with Station to Station.
That is a bit of a not, and he occasionally pops up. I'm not a David Bowie fan at all. I like stuff here and there.
Immediately.
Yeah, there are reasons, but I won't go into them now. But yeah, he does come up sometimes because some of his songs mean an enormous amount to me, but not necessarily as a body of work over many years, as indeed not many people do really after who are recording for that long. But some of the songs do creep up, but Station to Station's in there. Yes, that was a conscious nod.
It just, in terms of the first poem, Station, How do you go about, because it felt like almost like a very precious, like small diary entry reading it. It felt like I don't know how to describe it, but how do you go about that with prose poetry, making sure that it feels like a poem almost rather than just prose?
Now, Russell Edson, who is the great American prose poetry guy, speaks in an interview about the shape of thought. And I think that is exactly it. When I read that, I immediately thought, I wish I'd read this 10 years ago, because I wouldn't have had to think for 10 years of how exactly it is. And I think it is that shape of a poetic thought that and it's not the same. And he talks in his interviews, which are really entertaining. He talks about it being very different from free writing, where you just sort of write anything, but you have an idea that you sort of fill the words. It's like, I don't know, it's like filling a balloon with water. It sort of takes its wobbly shape, but you sort of got this balloon and you fill it with stuff. That's I just made that one up on the spot, but it's very accurate.
It works well.
Then you show it.
I shall put that in the book. It has this sort of thing, and then you drop it on someone, it surprises them, and so that's a really good one. Write that down. But yeah, they come out, or the first draft, and I tend to think that they come out more or less like first drafts, but the ones from Learning to Have Lost, when you asked me to send copies, I found that I didn't have, for some reason, the original or didn't have a copy of the book that I could copy from. I only had a PDF and I couldn't work out how to copy. So I just went back to the originals and copied them and thought, actually, gosh, I've changed that a lot since the original, but I've forgotten all the changes I've made. But they sort of do come, because they sort of set little things in motion. And I did used to fall asleep on trains, because I work nights, and I'd go out on a Friday night having not slept till since about Thursday 4 o'clock, and then I'd get a train back from London at about 1:45 in the morning, and I'd wake up in Northampton, or I was supposed to be in Luton, or indeed Northampton, back through Luton again, and in London again before you wake up, many times. But the places that I say about waking up, there's a little bit of, again, Gawain and the Green Knight and finding the castle there. And there's also that room that near the end of 2001, which I'm probably misremembering, because I haven't seen it since I was about 17. But there's that spacious room with the figure in bed, and that comes in. That's another place I wake up. So it's just all these other things that sort of mirror each other, and they form this wobbly balloon full of water that I managed to tie a knot in. And then
fantastic idea, the balloon idea. Yeah. Well, thank you, Oz, for explaining the prose poetry side of things to me. I, for one, feel a little bit more certain about it all now. So it was really interesting to hear about that. And thank you for sharing your work. I think we're going to go over to Lucy now and hear some of your work. But before we do that, actually, I wondered if we could hear just a little bit about your role as a South Cumbria Poet Laureate. What exactly did that entail?
Oh gosh, I wasn't expecting that question. It was really what I wanted to do with it. So given my interest in teaching, I ended up working a lot with usually infant age children in school, supporting them to write poetry and connect with their own experience. And I remember feeling I was in a foreign land when someone told me that she wanted to add to the list of my favourite things my second best horse. I thought, gosh, we've had different life experiences. I also chose to do quite a lot of work with the charity Mind, running writing and reading courses for their service users. So it was that and some writing to commission. I think the role was evolving at the time, so I didn't have a job spec. It was what I wanted to make of it.
Quite open for creativity then, I guess.
Yeah.
And I mean, also you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but how have you made poetry work with your role as a therapist?
Well, inevitably, poems come to mind when I'm working with clients, and I would never sort of force them on them, but there are certain clients, once the relationship is well developed, I feel able to, or I might choose sometimes to refer to that and make it clear that it's not a prescription and it's not homework, but just being very careful to offer it rather than insist. But more broadly, I think I tend to work a lot with image, and that really helps some clients find the sense of what it is they're trying to get hold of. So it's both literal and sort of more broadly in what I offer them. And I also work with poetry when I'm running training courses for fellow therapists, particularly work around loss, because there's so much great poetry of loss that can help you understand the shape of it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, well, I think we should probably hear your first poem, which is January Sends a Short but Important. I can't even read my handwriting. No. Yeah.
Okay. We climb slowly along the winter valley's side, cold enough to welcome the blood thud of walking, warmed too by the rhythm of talk and no talking which good friends have. Communion hunger satisfied, the self reorients in centripetal motion. We turn at the track's end by the old hall to see a twin black sleekness of birds, distant small. Two cormorants at the mere's edge, where skeletal trees, coppiced into base-bunched clumps, are precisely mirrored in the cloud-bright water. A coot leaves, opened by the soft prow of its breast as it cleaves the surface, a single, perfect, widening V of wake. Paused, we notice how the wall's moss glows with the light it gathers, how deep the silent air goes.
That was beautiful and beautifully read.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, you go ahead.
I was just going to say that poem's one of a sequence that I think I'll be working on forever, which I call the Holy Sonnets, with a slightly abashed look at John Donne, because they seek to celebrate the moments that make life worth living. And for me, they're quite often moments that happen out there in nature. And so that's
what I was going to ask is, I wondered what the particular relevance of nature was to you, because I noticed it crops up in quite a lot of your work.
It does, yes. Well, curiously, I was thinking when Oz was talking about writing about the wolf on and off, for me, it's the lambs. I find myself writing about sheep and lambs so much. My phone is stuffed with pictures of lambs, and I do write about sheep a lot. It just is being outside is just essential to me.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? I'm fascinated because when asked to send in the text to show, I thought, I better stick to it. And you're saying about this sequence that you think you're going to be working on for a long, long time. I noticed it's not exactly the same as the printed version, that the bird has specifically become a coot now, and it's a bird in here. And I've
got a keen eye.
Yeah, and it's actually, to be honest, I thought these are the three I hope you do, and I'm gonna play bingo with them, and that was the first one. So I love that poem.
It should have been a coot. It must have slipped through the proofing net.
Well, I love that because I just because something's printed, it's not finished. It's it changes every time I read them, and I'm just fascinated by the fact that they go, it's a coot, and it's
It's amazing you picked that out.
Yes, second edition will change it.
Yeah. we've just got a couple of comments from people in the audience. We've got Jan and Scott saying that that was lovely, and Emily McKinney says that it was beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Praise.
It's a beautiful moment, and if I've conveyed that, I've done my job.
Conveyed it very, very well, I think. The next poem that you'll be reading is Bleach. Can you explain a little bit about this poem before you read it?
Sure, this is the first in the title sequence from Shades of Blue. And it quite literally was inspired by all the different shades of blue that I saw when I spent some time in Crete. So there's a sequence of 6, which all have different shades of blue in them. And this is the first one, the shade of blue that we saw at the beach. Cloudy blue-green, like sea glass at the shingle beach, where men, serious, purposeful, are buttressed by gear. Feet planted wide astride the air, they prime harpoons and strap on bags for catch, before backing on flippered feet into the water, like evolution in reverse. While further out in the waves, a middle-aged woman is splashing a stiff-armed, awkward crawl, throwing a stick every so often, then swimming to it, as if she were her own dog. And this puzzles me until I see her emerge. How she steps across the rocks and pebbles, sure-footed, leaning on the stick. How when she has dried the heavy breasts, the beautiful, time-sagged flesh, she dresses and, leaving the stick, walks up the beach towards whatever the day holds next.
Oh, that's gorgeous. Thank
you. It was a lovely beach.
There was like evolution in reverse. I think that's such a fantastic line. That's going to stick in my head.
Well, thank you. I think it was something about the webbed feet and the way they had to kind of step really high to get it.
Yeah.
It was so striking.
It was fantastic. And then also the as if she were her own dog. I think that's a lovely image. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's beautiful. Also, was it do you know this woman? Was it just a random woman on the beach?
The woman I was watching.
Yeah.
I think I partly because I find it I do a lot of wild swimming, but I find it quite hard to get out of the sea. And I quite often end up crawling on hands and knees. And then I saw her with this stick and I just thought, that's so clever.
Yeah. It's a fantastic idea. Okay. Shall we go straight on to your next poem, which is Witness?
Yes, and I've got the lambs in. Hooray.
Yes.
I actually was out walking yesterday and was lucky enough to see a lamb being born. It was amazing. And this poem, which I wrote a couple of years ago, is about another walk involving a newly born lamb.
Okay.
Witness. Not 200 yards up the bridleway, from where the rabbit kit lies 4x4 on the tarmac, its cream-fringed honey-brown conies slashed with the pale pink sheen of gut, clean still, not yet found by birds or flies. In the muddy field corner, beyond the white-flocked blackthorn, the glistening red pennant of afterbirth still trails behind the ewe, whose head dips to lick at her trembling, baggy-skinned young. World-shocked, new to light and gravity, shakily they lever themselves upright, stand bemused, lift apprentice limbs, and crumple onto mud, their untried bleats so faint they scarcely trouble air. Nudged, nuzzled, they blunder along her flanks, bunting her legs, her rump, to find the waiting teats at last. They butt. Comfort comes down. and quiet. The ewe's head lifts. She stares and is still. Startled by a walker's footsteps, the pheasant on the wall flounces magnificently off. Crows lift reluctantly from the tree. Slow, deliberate, like old men rising. The beauty and the pathos of all endeavour lie in the air. So many endings and beginnings. Now, forever.
I think we need a moment of silence after that. Oh, that's excellent. And
Splashed with the pale pink sheen of gut. Love that.
yeah, you really embrace the gruesomeness of that side of it, and it is all part and parcel of this endings and beginnings. And all that
Yes.
sort of thing.
Yes.
And
sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say it's not necessarily conscious. What I'm doing is just looking really carefully, trying to attend to all the details of what I see.
Yeah. John Sullivan has said many images created, which I would definitely agree with. You've managed to just, you do create these very in-depth, very on the nail images, as you say. Maybe just you don't intend for them to be in a gruesome way or anything, but you do it very skillfully. And we've also got Ian Fallow saying, "Thank you for taking me on this walk with you."
Thank you. My pleasure.
And there's just a couple more comments as well. Who else? Emily McKinney says, "I love people watching and swimming. Beautiful." So that was about your last poem. And then Jan Ann Scott says, "The beach holds so much inspiration for writing," which I think is true.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Fantastic. Okay, the next poem that you're reading is Easter Island.
Yes. I was struck by Oz describing his collection, which was in response, or possibly partly in response to his mother's death. My mum died last year, not of COVID, but it was after a long and really horrible illness. So the sequence I'm working on at the moment, which is going to be the title sequence in my next book called Hungers, is about my mum and her illness, and about family and connections, and just, everything comes in. So if we have time, I have 2 poems from that sequence. If not, I'll go with this one. So this is Easter Island. Acceptance sounds soft, curved, and yielding, like weed tugged gently downriver, or the tawny flecks of wheat on the wind. And perhaps in the end it is so. But its process is violent, the rip and roar of a great bear tearing at your startled flesh. Something astonishingly crude and cruel, an orthopedic surgery of the self, with scalpel slice, sawing, the splinter of bone. It is a remorseless masonry, mallet and chisel, the thud of matter shaped to grief's design. The impact and recoil leave you stunned, realizing how, at height, the rock crags through the velvet of grass on the path only you can walk, staring transfixed into the obdurate face of things, the hard, impersonal blankness angled to eternity and dwarfing you. You who are alone in a wide ocean, on this hillside, under all of the sky. The birds gone silent, and only the sound of hammering, of wood and of nails.
That's stunning.
Thank you. Thank
Really
you.
beautiful.
It's
Yeah.
one of my particular interests in my client work is working with loss, not just loss by bereavement, but all sorts of other potentially less physical losses, loss of capacity, loss of agency, loss of relationship, loss of occupation. You know, it's a central thread in human experience, and acceptance sounds so easy, and it really isn't.
Yeah. It's just, I'll be thinking about that for quite a while, I think, that poem.
And again, that lovely phrase, the remorseless masonry, I thought that was a wonderful way of describing it.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing it, Lucy.
You're welcome.
The next poem, I think the next poem is Driving Away.
Yeah, that's the one that's from later in the sequence. I don't think, probably won't have time to do that and the other one I planned. So I'm happy to do either one that's next in that sequence or the other one from the other collection or the other sequence that's out, whichever you prefer.
Is the other one in relation to the poem that we just heard?
No, Driving Away is the one that comes from later on in the Hunger sequence.
Okay.
The opposite of Lonely is the first one in another sequence, so I'm happy to do that.
Let's say Driving Away. We've got time for that.
Yes. Okay. Driving away, still in my black, the sun dropping towards familiar hills whose ochre is piebald with cloud shadow. I have the sense of a plant lifted, or rather its roots, fine, bone white, the thin dry dirt already crumbling from them, and the roots barely branched, their slack length drooping, hungry and slight. But lifted, I can tell, by a careful hand. No rip of filaments, only the patter of soil falling. And though I don't see the plant itself, I feel its surprising vigour over such delicate roots, and imagine some new place being prepared for them, in dark loam, deep enough to take their length, with room for spreading, infilled with that good earth, pressed just firmly enough. And after that, the mild spring sun for growing, and the steady quench of rain. So the shape of the sequence does come through to somewhere new. As is only accurate, you have to go through an awful lot of grim stuff on the way.
Yeah. It's such a fantastic image, the idea of the roots and the soil being shaken off them. I mean, where did that come to you?
I literally, that picture just popped into my head. That's quite often how it happens. I know exactly what road I was on, looking at the hills that I've driven past for 25 years. And the picture just came, and then it was a conversation with a friend that helped me see what they were like more clearly.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Sandra Maria says it was very beautiful and profound.
I'm so glad. If what I write makes sense to people, then that's it. I've done my job. I've communicated something. So
it seems to be resonating, with a lot of people watching. And we have got time to hear the opposite of Lonely, if you'd like to read that as well.
Okay, I'd love to. Yes. This is the first in a really short sequence that's published as a kind of micro pamphlet called Wish You Were Here. And the first poem is called The Opposite of Lonely. But can we have some more sex first? You'd asked, reaching for me as I stepped from the bed, passed through that shaft of busy sun, and me looking back over my shoulder, laughing, sure of something for the first time, knowing at last that I stretched from earth to sky, was a rooted thing, like a mountain maybe, and a spreading thing, like a green tree with ripe fruit. So that when, later, you had gone, and I, undressing for sleep, was stopped by smelling you on my skin. Not sex, but you. The convulsion of longing was total, sufficient in itself, because true. And my own pale shoulder, beautiful and beloved of me, because your head had rested there.
That's stunning.
Thank you.
Someone has commented saying that, Lucy, your delivery is wonderful.
Cool.
And then John Sullivan also says, the pace you read gives my brain time to digest your wonderful phrases. So you do deliver it really, really well.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's really important to leave space just to let the words sink in.
Absolutely. Oz, how did we do from the collection, your predictions?
There was only that one, and I did hear in the conversation earlier on that one had changed, the dog walker left.
Yes.
I was hoping for the dog walker.
Really?
However, I have my copy here. I'm enjoying it myself.
At least you can read it. Well, that was an excellent selection of poetry from both of you, so thank you so much. And we do have time to hear just one more poem from each of our poets. But I will just say to everyone watching at home that if you haven't already, then you can sign up to the Homestage Poetry mailing list, and then can be notified about any similar events like this that happen in the future. And they'll all be sent direct to your inbox. So do sign up if you're interested. But I think let's hear Oz's last poem, which is another section from Wolf Planet.
Yeah, it's near the end of Wolf Planet, and it's particularly after what you're saying about acceptance. So I guess this is an acceptance poem, and it's sort of finishes off the sequence in Wolf Planet, apart from a little coda, but it's the one that also echoes back to, and I think of these three chapbooks as a sort of a triptych, and it's the one that echoes back to Learning to Have Lost. So here we go. When all's said and done, the big bad wolf's not so big or bad, so I invite him round for tea every once in a while. We've little in common, but long years of huffing and puffing, and it's best to avoid politics or religion with wolves, so we keep conversation insubstantial. How my job's going, what's new in the dark wood, and how there's a trend towards personal redemption and a wider morality in current comedy shows. I reckon this latter's a good thing, but the big bad wolf feigns ambivalence, adhering to his culturally prescribed role. He never stays late, getting twitchy when the light fades and the howling starts, gathering darkness into a concert of freedom and need. When he takes his leave, his paw is hot and wet in my cold hand, and even as we exchange commonplaces on the threshold, I can see his eyes are elsewhere, unpicking the hunger we share but never mention in the spiced heart of my gingerbread house.
Oh, fantastic. Oh,
Gosh, all time to talk about that one. I feel like there's so many phrases out of that I could pluck out and have as titles for poems.
Yeah. And it ties together quite a few other things that we talked about in a really nice, neat way.
It's not so big and bad after all.
Yeah. Well, that was wonderful. And then very quickly, I'm sorry that it is so quick. We are coming up to the end. Very quickly over to Lucy for your last poem.
Okay. This one doesn't need nearly as much space as the others. It's called Whatever Happened in Between. And somebody once approached me in a supermarket and told me how much they loved this poem, which quite made my day, if you can imagine.
Oh.
I thought there'd be a time before wrinkles and after spots, between period pain and the menopause, with the overdraft cleared long before the pension was due. Or again, I thought there'd be a point when wage became salary and rent gave way to mortgage. When, growing pains over, I'd enter my prime, relishing it, untroubled by age. I thought there'd be an adulthood, where fear segued into confidence, doubt to hope, and that this would happen naturally, a promised land gained. But instead, I cope with days when the face in the mirror is both old and young, when crow's feet coexist with childlike wonder. Now I make noises getting out of chairs, but still can't resist sweets. Perhaps there is no in-between, no arduous pilgrimage to completion, no sloughing off of every childish thing, no terminus, only an accretion of time spent and places known, love given and received, joy felt, as well as sorrow. All we ever have is the here and now. After all, we never reach tomorrow.
Oh.
Thank you so much.
I imagine so many people could relate to that. I'm not surprised someone approached you in the supermarket saying that they loved it.
It was a lovely moment.
Mm.
And although I had to canter through that, I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me to come and read on the home stage. It's been such a pleasure.
And
Thank you
likewise
so much.
as well. It's been a delight.
Oh,
Lovely to meet you both.
Definitely.
Yes.
I've truly had such a nice time hearing your poetry, so I feel like I should be the one thanking you two for coming along and sharing your stuff. So really a huge thank you, and thank you to everyone who's watched at home and sent in your lovely comments, which is really nice to read. So it's been a wonderful hour, and have a lovely rest of your evening, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.